Hello, I am Adam Litchfield, and this is the Adam Litchfield Show. And today we are talking about the new Georgia voting bill passed by Governor Brian Kemp. And also we're talking about how Biden is going to bring the COVID vaccine for all adults down to April 19th, 2 weeks before he said. Let's hop right into it. So let's get right into this. First, let's start with the new Georgia voting bill passed by Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia. So, how the new law limits voting. My source right now is the Washington Post. I have another source called factcheck.org that we'll be getting to later. But here's how the new law limits voting. First, it shrinks the window for voters to request mail ballots rather than allowing voters to request ballots 6 months from Election Day. The new law says voters can start requesting ballots 78 days out. Counties can begin sending ballots to voters just 29 days before Election Day rather than the previous 49. So it also sets off an earlier cutoff date for ballot application requests. So basically, this means you get it way later than you would, approximately 20 days after. So it's cutting the time in half, but you would get it, which I think it limits voting by people having less time to vote. And simply, people have things to do, they have jobs, so it'd be tough. Okay, critics say any mail delays with these shorter periods can lead to voters not getting the ballots on time or not being able to return them in time. That's exactly what I was saying. Mail delays. So say mail gets too clogged, there's a big issues with mail. This would stop people from being able to vote, which I think is absolutely terrible because remember, people need to vote for this to be a democracy. It's a constitutional republic, sure, but people need to be able to vote to pick the representatives in our Congress, House, presidency. So that's another thing I don't like about this bill. Counties in the state can send mail ballot applications only to voters who request them, which I think is great because if you don't request a mail-in ballot, you shouldn't be able to get it. Seeing as you could just go turn in your mail-in ballot and then go vote, I think it's absolutely terrible that you can get two ballots even though you should only have one. But as opposed to simply sending every registered voter a ballot application. Oh, I'm sorry, my mistake. I thought I read ballots. Ballot applications. So every voter can fill out to get a mail-in ballot and then not be able to vote at the location. But people who specifically request them should be saving paper and time and money, which I think is great. Sure, it would limit voting, but you have to specifically request for it because if you don't want to vote, you really don't have to. The new voter ID requirements: voters who cast mail-in ballots will have to provide one of several forms of identification. This provision replaces a signature match previously used to confirm voters' identities. This is one of the most controversial because critics say it's likely to disproportionately affect black voters, which, I mean, it could because black voters might have less ID. Because I read that. I heard that on Fox News, but you should have to provide ID to vote because if you don't have ID, why should you be able to vote? So you're saying somebody who's 17 can walk in there and vote, right? This is what I would like to see implemented, which would end all these politicians claiming, such as Donald Trump in the last presidential election, claiming, oh, voter fraud, people with fake ballots were voting, they were cheating, but this would end all of those allegations. So I think it's great. They don't have to provide a copy of identification, but they have to provide a driver's license, number, social security number, acceptable identification, which I think is absolutely great. If you can turn in your driver's license, that would basically fix 90% of the issues we have with our electorate. Not the electorate, the way we hold our elections. A limit on the number of ballot drop boxes during early voting. It essentially limits the number of drop boxes in each county to one per early voting site, or one every 100,000 voters in the county. Whichever number is smaller, the drop boxes can't be conveniently spread over the county. For example, in places where there aren't in-person early voting locations, they have. I'm sorry. They have to be located in either a county election office or an early voting precinct location. They have to be indoors, which critics say makes them less accessible. It could lead to crowds where voters are usually congregated. Which, I mean, one or not one, a limit on the number of ballot boxes, sure, it could be good speaking as if there's only one ballot box per 100,000 people. But if we're talking about a huge county, like say the county of, I'm sorry, I'm Floridian. The county of Atlanta. The county of Atlanta contains, which handles 3.3 million people inside of it, which would be 1,500,000 would be 3.2 million. 3.2 million divided by 100,000 would be or just be a lot. I'm sorry, first podcast, but it would be a lot per person, which would be actually absolutely terrible. Next, shorting of early voting runoff elections. So we basically just saw that in the latest Florida Senate, or not Florida, Georgia Senate election with Kelly Loeffler, Raphael Warnock, uh, John Ossoff, and David Perdue, which was a huge runoff election and eventually decided the fate of the Senate for the U.S. So, no early voting in runoff elections is actually, I feel like, or shortened early voting, which would make it so you can't vote 2 weeks earlier instead of 1 week, which I think was great. So it'd be held in a single Monday, Friday period, one work week, which I think is absolutely great. Because early voting against early voting, if you want to vote, if you can't make early voting, get the wrong voting. State lawmakers get much more power over county and local elections. So, and Republicans have decisive majorities in most of the Senate and state house, which I think is basically gerrymandering. But yeah, I mean, gerrymandering is drawing up counties just to get your people, or not hired, but voted in, more likely to be voted in. So I feel like there should be, say, not much more power, but less power. There should be no power from people in office of influencing elections, which I completely disagree with. There should be no power. So the president can't influence the presidential election. That's exactly what I think. That's my opinion. A few ways to expand voting: a minimum number of drop boxes. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. The first podcast jitters. I'm so sorry, everybody. A ban on handing out food and water within 150 feet of a polling place, or within 25 feet of any voter. Any Republican says is aimed at stopping outside use from influencing voters. Democrats say it's supposed to make it harder for people to wait in long lines, or particularly on hot or cold days. Election officials are permitted to set up water stations, but they're not required to do so. Honestly, I feel like this is not. This is I'm speechless. This is a terrible policy that somebody can't hand out food or water to somebody who's in the hot sun during voting election in fall. Fall, sure, it might not be normally hot, but sure, why not? I mean, even during summer, sometimes it snows. You know what I mean? So it could get really hot, which is more common than snowing, by the way. And people could need water. People could need food. Somebody could be starving, and you're gonna prohibit somebody from giving them food just because of you feel like they're gonna influence against you. Then set up water stations. Make it a mandate that you have to set up water stations and food stations. Maybe make the food you have to pay for, but the water station should be free because water you need it to survive, and food, but you can last a day without food. That's a terrible take. In addition of early vote, this is how it expands voting. In addition of early voting in most rural counties, this bill requires at least 2 Saturdays of early voting for each primary and general election. Previous Georgia law required only one. This allows counties to choose when their early voting locations are open for a minimum of 8 hours a day between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., which I think is great. Rural counties, they need more time because they're usually farmers, lawyers, hard stuff, and they have to work hard and have to put a lot of time into their craft. So I feel like this is great. More recesses for precincts so lines don't get too long. The law basically requires the state to monitor polling locations to see if they have any lines longer than an hour, or still have voters waiting in line for more than an hour after polls were supposed to close. In those cases, the state is required to either form new precinct locations to ease the strain or beef up the existing polling locations capacities to handle large numbers of voters. This applies to specifically populous precincts, mostly in urban areas. I feel like that's great. Absolutely amazing. So basically, if the polling closes and it's over an hour, wait. They're gonna set up a new location, and you're gonna go there and vote there, basically to get voting done, which I think is absolutely great. That's a great policy. Here's what didn't make it on the bill: a block on Sunday voting. Early proposals called for a ban on Sunday voting, which this proposal was seen directly as targeting black voters who often vote as part of the church-run souls to the polls effort that take place on Sundays. I feel like that's terrible. I mean, Sunday voting, you should be able to vote on Monday through Sunday. Because Sunday voting mostly targets evangelicals in the voting populace, I feel like black or white, it could really affect voting and make less turnouts, which I think is absolutely terrible. So now on to Biden basically bringing the vaccine from 20 days earlier from when he would said last week. I mean, first he said it would be by end of May to April 19th, then back to the end of May to back to April 19th. So basically, I'm I'm really confused. He needs to give a definitive answer, or have at least the White House press secretary Jen Psaki give an actual definitive answer, because he keeps flip flopping and confusing everybody. One day he says May, next day he says April. I feel like if he's gonna bring it up to April, he needs to guarantee it to the people. Even if it's at the end of May, which would be fine, he would need to bring it up to the people. So basically, the news is he personally said yesterday that it would be up to April 19th, conflicting with his statement 1 week ago saying everything would be at the end of May. So I'm just a little confused. I would like somebody to clarify that for me, especially White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. She needs to clarify to the people. But that's it for today, guys. If you enjoyed the podcast, please drop a follow. Thank you. This is my first podcast. It was terrible. Please forgive me. And have a good one. Thank you.